I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Martin Ciupa, a subject matter expert on artificial intelligence. Martin is the CEO of Remoscope Inc, an AI-based telehealth startup, and an advisor and consultant to Mindmaze, a Unicorn Neurotech company focusing on applied advanced neuroscience in everyday life. Martin has decades of experience in computing and AI, PhD studies in AI, and a master's degree in cybernetics. He joins us today to discuss AI superintelligence and the singularity. So Martin, welcome back, sir. We previously touched on ghosts in the machine in terms of the human qualities we unintentionally build into AI. So today I wanted to focus on God in the machine, especially in regards to AI superintelligence and the singularity. So I want to start out with a story that was in Futurism that quoted Google exec Mo Gadot as saying that AI researchers are creating God. And he said that in a very negative light, I guess. So what are your thoughts on that story?
Well, it's a very interesting, but also sensitive topic, because you will find in your audience people who take very positive views about the concept of God and others that take very negative views. And you kind of mentioned that with Godot and his positioning. And I think if you take a philosophical point of view on this, you can accommodate without treading on the toes of whether it be atheists or theists, and you just talk about it from a philosophical God perspective. And what I mean by a philosophical God is that being, that creator, that first mover, that is greater than which can be conceived by, in our case, humankind. So something that transcends all definitions, is beyond ourselves of contemplating their omnipresence, omnisentience, etc., etc. So you can see aspects of that in what we're trying to do with futurism. You can see what we're trying to do in terms of discovering how the universe was created, whether it's through the physics of nothingness, or whether it's a Genesis-like creator of the universe. So I just want to precede that because it's a very interesting topic, because I think that there is a common theme both to the singularity and superintelligence and transcendence, human 2.0, and certain theistic, depending on which religion you go for, but there's a common root in terms of transcendence beyond this world. The world is a veil of tears or problems, and that there is this deus ex machina, the God in the universe, the God in the machine, that may come to give us salvation and a future beyond this world. So it's an interesting point to talk about, but you have to watch and be careful not to tread on people's toes who are committed to one metaphysic over the other. So I just wanted to say that first, and I hope it sets the scene of our discussions for today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to bring me back now to your question?
Well, it's so interesting to me. I've had this idea in the back of my mind. I heard this somewhere, but someone had said that all science is social science, including computer science. And I think the reason they said that was because all science is done by human beings, right? And so we have to fit that into these mental constructs of our myths and legends, our desires, our hopes for transcendence. And so it is interesting to read stories like that and read these concerns about AI superintelligence and the singularity, and then say, well, how do these fit with our our past myths and legends and perceptions about the larger scope of the universe, I guess. So
yeah, I mean, in some respects reduces to the definition of epistemology and ontology. So epistemology is about knowing knowledge, and scientia, is very much part of trying to understand, trying to gain knowledge from the world. Whereas ontology is more about what does it mean to be in the world, being and time. And so, but these things really do interconnect, because the world is a stage in a certain sense where we seek knowledge to become greater than what we are. And that comes back to this being which is greater than can be conceived. So when we are looking at AI, in particular the end game, if we say AI and narrow AI where we are today, and we're looking for it to be sentient and sapient, to grow into human level AI, and then from there to AGI, artificial generic intelligence, that can solve problems for which it has not yet encountered, doesn't have the narrow domain data sets to learn from, but it can sort of abstract problems, solutions to new novel problems. So that's AGI. And then from that, one is assuming that there will be great acceleration and of self-discovery and self-reflection for the system to really become super intelligent. And that is a proxy for this deus ex machina, the God from the machine, well, from the machine, in the machine. It has to be there for it to be, it has to be in to be able to speak out to us. And, deus ex machina is known as a device in narratives to solve problems with a click of the fingers, like, the Tolkien eagles are coming in The Hobbit and in the Lord of the Rings trilogies. So, I think there are real serious parallels, and it's useful for us to try to uncover that and to see what it is that we're bringing, what expectations, what framing we are creating in our futurism, as well as our religious pasts and current days.
Oh, absolutely. Well, so this idea of the singularity and the superintelligence, this has scared more than just this researcher. Stephen Hawking had said that the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Do you think that he was being overly pessimistic with that?
Well, I did a TEDx around 2017, and I touched on these topics then, so it sort of feels like familiar ground to talk about them. And I came up, which I thought was a cute phrase, and it plays upon two things. One is the prophets of doom. And there I'm spelling prophets as P-R-O-P-H, the prophets, coming out and a voice in the wilderness saying, beware, beware, the Ides of March or whatever are coming. And then you have the prophets of doom, which are basic people using AI, perhaps in unethical ways, to generate good profits, P-R-O-F-I-T-S. So the one that you're talking about is the prophets, the prophecy. And I think people are bringing their mental baggage of their own beast natures that humankind has evolved from, but still has. I mean, we've talked in previous episodes of the monsters of the age from, I tend to use examples from sci-fi. I hope your audience can appreciate what I'm trying to do here. And so they bring with it characteristics which we do not need to gift. We do not need to train our AI systems with. They don't have to be seeking mates. They don't have to be seeking domination over other groups that they are competing for resources for. They can be less of the demons of our beast natures, as we've said before, and more of the angels of our better natures, more altruistic. So you do find people who, I wish to go gently here, that do not have a strong philosophical background and have not reflected in parts of this. And so you often get physicists like Hawking and even business people like Elon Musk and whatever, who have had a different experience in life, the hardness of big business, or in the hardness of physical assumptions that life is like such and such. And you can appreciate and even sympathize with Hawking because he had a very rough throw of the dice. So, I mean, he sees the world in that harsh light, perhaps he did. Hard to know about people's deep motivations, but perhaps. And yes, they saw negativity of superintelligence and the possibility of severe existential risk. My judgment is that if we do it right, that need not be the case. There's actually probably more risk in narrow intelligence in terms of bias because we are not yet experienced about how to manage all of the ethical issues. We are taking our baby steps into AI and we're falling down and we have made mistakes. I'm hoping, and I think it's possible to build ethical AI and such that basis we can go to superintelligence.
Yeah, well, and so since you mentioned Elon Musk, actually, I have a couple of more prophets of doom. So let me get them out of the way first. So Bill Gates and Elon Musk, both of them have voiced concerns about AI superintelligence. What I've seen is, in terms of speakers in this area, there seem to be essentially two camps. There are people who are pro and people who are con, right? And this would be the prophets versus prophecy. And in Gates' case, he'd said, I'm one of those who's concerned about superintelligence. First, machines will do a lot of work for us and won't be super smart. That'll be positive if we manage it well, but a few decades after that, they'll be smart enough to be a concern. Now, Elon Musk, he had said that the development of artificial intelligence is the greatest existential threat to humanity. And I think you'd mentioned that a few moments ago. So again, maybe that harshness of business is kind of what drives that perspective. Although it is interesting that in Musk's case, if I remember correctly, he's involved with AI development. So,
well, he developed OpenAI, was one of the founders, and he moved, I think, from being in day-to-day management control of OpenAI, but certainly he's still an investor. I think that's the case. So yes, I mean, and OpenAI being severely criticized for GPT-3 and others, and as much as, and claims, weird claims in my opinion, that there may be consciousness. That comes from the chief scientist. It was then backed up by the CEO. And there was a lot of brouhaha about that. So yeah, and it goes further in the case of Elon Musk, kind of like where does he stand on this issue? Because there's a Neuralink. And Neuralink was positioned, I think, nobly, at least in one part of its vision, as being able to produce brain-machine interfaces, neural chips, to be able to augment maybe damaged neural circuitry in the case of people who have had traumatic brain injury or strokes. And so they've lost functionality of moving their arms or speaking well. And that damage may be able to be augmented by in silico circuitry, either outside but with electrodes or directly inside the neural circuitry. I've worked in this area for a Swiss unicorn in BMI, and I've applied for patents in this area and developed them. So it's something I know a little bit about, and it's full of problems. But and Neuralink has had some news that they've lost 8 of their 10 founders in the last few days. Well, over a period of time, but the last chap, the 8th guy, has just moved on. So there's really some issues there, and we haven't the time to go into it. But my point is, Musk has a position not only for prosthetics as BMI, for Neuralink, but also as a counter to superintelligence AI, whereas humans will be able to be symbiotically connected The idea is that there'd be like a human 2.0, a transcendence, and transhumanism, not so much a transhumanist perspective. And that's interesting, but there are a host of issues with that concept, because the AI would perhaps be more parasitic, more powerful than the human side, and it would atrophy to the point where what you've got is just the AI.
Well, so if I could jump in for a second, that dovetails perfectly actually into my next speaking point, which was, so these, again, we started with these negative views of AI superintelligence, the singularity. Now we have proponents of it as well, like Ray Kurzweil. He'd said the pace of change will be so astonishingly quick that we won't be able to keep up unless we enhance our own intelligence by merging with the intelligent machines we're creating. So that goes right to what you're saying about Neuralink, but it is interesting about this notion of the human intelligence atrophying in favor of the AI, I guess.
Yeah, it's been discussed by Susan Schneider in one of her recent books, and it's kind of like the suicide of the mind. And I know of neuroscientists who are engaged at a high level in this research area. As I said, I've been in it myself. And it's like the risk is that it's not symbiotic, but rather it is parasitic, in that you've got this very powerful system spoon feeding a system which is evolved for many things for which the superintelligence system is not, for perpetuating itself into the future biologically, etc., etc. And the risk is that, just like you have with an exoskeleton supporting the body of an injured person, if that exoskeleton is doing all of the heavy lifting, literally, the muscles of the paralyzed person, perhaps, whilst it's reading the instructions from the brain through cognichips and through brain chips to be able to move the exoskeleton, the muscles that are there in that human, what is left, are not being exercised, because all of the heavy lifting is being done by the exoskeleton. And as for the muscles of our body, then the muscle of the mind, so to speak, is the analogy. And I think that's very much the risk, that what we have left is not human 2.0, but just AI. Even the human 1.0 is gone. So I would sound a cautionary warning for that symbiotic ambition. It's not a way of transcending humanity. It is a way of leaving humanity or humanness behind, is the risk. Now, there are ways that you might be able to get around it, and if you want, we can discuss them, or you may have some other questions because it's such a big topic. But going back to the God in the machine, it's like certain theistic points of view is that after death, there is a moving on to some kind of heaven, some kind of paradise. And I think there is this perspective of moving on, transcendence through the singularity to a different kind of life. But I'm not sure there's much of humanity in that kind of transcendence, is my point.
You know, it is interesting that that concept is so interesting. Moving on as opposed to augmentation, I guess. And I guess what comes to mind is some of the things that Ray Kurzweil has talked about is, he'd said that people will probably have large concerns about things like Neuralink. And he said that the time when these will become commonplace is the time when it won't matter, right? When when machine intelligence, when the spiritual aspect of machines is enough like us that people don't notice or care about the difference, perhaps. And that's not an exact quote. I'm paraphrasing pretty heavily, but It is interesting though. So if people move on to AI, maybe this is, there are people out there who think that there's an evolution that'll happen, right? And maybe this
Well,
is how
yeah,
people leave that behind.
but if you're leaving behind the things that you love about life, literally the love of your children, the love of your partner, the awesomeness, the feeling of awesomeness in terms of perceiving the universe and being in nature, and the things that make your life worth living, maybe they're not there in the superintelligence. If you are moving on to AI and leaving your humanity, your uniqueness, the uniqueness of humanity, humans are the summation of so many victories in terms of being able to spread their genes onto the next generation. And all of those victories that have been so hard earned and taught us so many things about purpose, about meaning, may be lost. I mean, there's a quote from Kant, Immanuel Kant, and I think it's in one of the critiques of reason, that says something like, what establishes the sense of awe in me the most is the heavens above me and the moral law within me. And just exactly why we should be inspired by the universe and find it awesome, or even the morality of how to act in the world. How do we instill that into AI? We don't really have an agenda. We don't have a timeline which articulates about artificial consciousness. Because through artificial consciousness, maybe we can have this sense of awe about the self being in the world and finding purpose there. But also the sense of, if you have artificial consciousness, maybe you have an artificial conscience. You can play out scenarios of, if I do this, then this is what might happen. And does that have a moral position compared to other acts? So you get from artificial consciousness, artificial conscience. And if you play out all of these scenarios of what if I do this, what if I do that, you may develop a moral compass, the AI. And it'd be interesting if the moral compass is compatible with our distilled core of a moral compass, if such exists. Because then that would be a safe AI, because it wouldn't do things to us that it would wish things not to be done to them by a higher order AI, so to speak. So yeah, you get all of these nestedness, and this concept of doing unto others as others do unto you is a moral law that you find in many religious traditions. It'd be interesting to see if we can find and derive a moral compass for AI with that philosophical ethic of reciprocity.
Now, you had mentioned a moment ago being able to, and again, this goes back to Neuralink. So I was just thinking that the movie that probably describes this transition the best might be Lawnmower Man, right? From like 1990. But
I'm going to have to rewatch that because it's a little bit back. I would talk to the movie Transcendence, if you remember.
Oh, okay,
that.
Okay.
Because I think that does explore the idea of an individual human moving on and all of the problems that causes with humanity that he's leaving behind.
So are there tools to do this? And again, I mean, in a sense, this almost goes beyond AI superintelligence, right? This is the merger of the human mind with AI superintelligence. Are there ways to do that can preserve our humanity? Or is that something that just gets left behind over time as the person changes irreparably?
I think perhaps it's possible. But it's not through symbiosis. It's by having a Socratic AI. Let me try to explain myself. People, particularly in pedagogy, in education, talk about the Socratic method of learning, or teaching, to be more precise, where the teacher, Socrates, teaches not by telling the person the answer. So here's the answer. You don't have to think, just apply this equation, you get the right result. But rather asking questions of the pupil, of the student, to elicit their thought so they kind of self-discover. And what they're doing is they're not being spoon-fed, use this equation, E equals mc squared, forget about what it means, just use it, you won't go wrong. Except that you will, but that's not. So talk about what is energy, what is mass, what happens if there is dynamism, if there's movement, what is the concept of the speed of light and how does that come into it, all of these things. And so Socrates is asking these questions, probing with the student for them to self-discover. And as they self-discover, the neuroplasticity is going on so that they are not just equipped with the equation, but they are equipped with the concepts and the means to understand explicability. You remember we've talked about the black box problem. Now there's no black box problem because there is a rational reflection based upon the neuroplasticity which has been created in the human so that they now understand the solution. So I believe that you could have this dialogue with a Socratic superintelligence, which is perhaps embodied in a metaverse. So you go into the metaverse. And so you go to Socrates, Mark 4.0 or whatever, and you start to have an ongoing discussion over 20, 30 years. And you're finding the beauty and understanding the awesomeness of the universe and understanding morality, ethics, etc., excuse me, that Kantian awesomeness that I've talked about. So the human remains in their essence of their being, but they are so much more now insightful. They are bringing to the table not just the knowledge of the world that the AI, Socrates AI, is teaching, but their humanness is preserved. So what happens is you don't get human 2.0. What you have is human 1.0 perfected.
I see what you mean. Yes. And so that it's natural growth, but it's guided by something that has gone beyond.
Yeah. And in a sense, let's go back to the metaphysics. This is what superintelligence can do in the context of this vision of the future, but it's also in the context of those theists who believe that they have a teacher who has taught them how to live a life, whether that be Buddha, whether that be Jesus Christ, or whether that be the Prophet Muhammad. And these are all teachers. They're all rabbis, in a sense. And the Holy Spirit, in that Christian sense, is another part of this Godhead, which is pushing you and promoting you to what Pierre Teilhard de Chardin would call a progress in the complex of consciousness. So at the omega point, which is the singularity point, there is a full realization of the world. So whether it's almost as if the metaphysics of the future, of transcendence of humanity, is the same dream. However, which way you want to address it, we are seeking transcendence from this veil of tears and suffering and problems which beset us individually and sociologically. We want to escape this. We want a better life for our children, which is not ignoble, is very noble. But not just for our children, but for all society. And I think that's our purpose.
Well,
am I making any kind of sense to you?
Yeah, it is interesting because what you're describing with the Socratic method is the way that these great religious and philosophical leaders have taught people, right? They have guided them to ask the questions and find their own answers. And maybe that helps us understand not only why we should do that in the future, but why that was done in the past. Because maybe if you just give people the answers, even if they can plug that data in and use it, it really lacks that breadth, depth, and scope of value that you would otherwise get by learning it yourself, right? And having, as you mentioned, the neuroplasticity and all the related concepts to truly understand it on a deep level.
Yeah, because I think humanity brings, as I was indicating earlier, some very special and unique perspectives, which are of value to any sentient creature. If there are many sentient creatures out there, mankind is unique because of the gift of its evolution. Through all of the suffering that we've had, we've built art, we've built music, we've built dreams, and we shouldn't lose those. Those are treasures of our civilizations. And to leave them behind, to be a better calculator, without the passion, without the sense of awe, without the sense of love, kindness, and just the uniqueness of our genetic heritage, I think would be a loss. It would not be a gain. So I want AI, I want superintelligence, I want it done right, I want it done safe, I want it to be done ethical, I want it to be a boon to society. I don't want people sidelined and split into haves and have-nots, which is often the case with our sociological systems. I want it to help us get to a place where we've dreamt of being and allow this to be an agent for positive change, not the negative that we see in some of our early futuristic not so much expectations, or I suppose that can apply, but plans. I just think it's a little bit naive and driven by prophets of doom, or prophets, spelled differently, of doom.
Yeah. Well, now, Martin, there's some necessity, perhaps, with superintelligence also, and the reason that I speculate on that is because society is becoming increasingly complex. Everything that we use, see, touch, or interact with is becoming more complicated. And in fact, I've read theories that talk about complexity itself increasing by necessity. And so it seems like the world that we live in is becoming too complex for human beings. Certainly in some ways it already is, right? And I'm wondering if it might not reach a point where to effectively run things, like our financial systems, climate change models, I mean, things along those lines, these are already outpacing our ability to really understand them, it seems like. Does it seem like AI superintelligence will be required in order to manage all of this?
Well, certainly, if we go along this industrial and the kind of civilization that we have today, if that doesn't change, then it's going to get more and more complex in solving things like climate change and managing effectively all of our technologies and the infrastructure that is there to support them. And it may well be that we say, well, let AI manage these mission critical systems. The problem, one of the problems there, is that if there was a situation where we either through our own volition, that is to say, no, we don't want these AIs being overlords for us, is that how would we roll back to a society and a civilization where we're in charge, when we've atrophied the capability, not just in terms of mental activity, but of skills. You know, would we have the skills if we haven't practiced them and we haven't trained people to do them? So if we go down the path of AI being the mission critical management system, if that was to ever go away because we wanted it to, or perhaps it wanted to, then we'd be in a cul-de-sac. We'd be in a place with not much place to go, and they would be suffering, you know, to get back to a situation that we do. And you'll find that there are people who talk about, well, maybe we should have a simpler society, and do simple things, be farmers, be philosophers, be scientists, but have the AI provide us with abundance so that we can have good housing, good education, etc., etc. Yeah, and that's fine as long as the AI doesn't go away or becomes a tyrant. So if we're going to go down that abundance society route where AI is the provider, we have to have confidence that it is a moral and ethical system that won't leave us.
Yeah.
Or we have maintained a simple state of human existence, albeit with health and education and food and all the rest of it. But basically be simple, so that if it was to roll back, we could rely on ourselves.
Well, and it seems like we've already started down that path, right? I mean, we have the complexity, we have the systems. You know, in terms of social systems, they're starting to talk about things like universal basic income, right? Which goes towards the abundance model that you talked about. You know, it seems like the human race has already started to move down. I mean, we've absolutely started to move down the path to complexity. Maybe what was missing was the control system, right? Right now, that's governance, and it's rule sets that are developed by lawyers in a room that really don't see the, you know, totality of what's going on. So maybe this AI superintelligence actually is, maybe that's the next step, because it can be there and control what we've already built that's already beyond us.
Yeah, or indeed invent, be creative, and find means of doing what we need to do to manage a complex society, but easier. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly a dream. The abundance society, the Tomorrowland concept is definitely there, and you know, it's possible, and it may well be. Though this also has its cautionary tale. In the metaverse, in this perfect world that we are considering, this transcendent, this heaven, this paradise where we can joyfully play and not hurt anybody, and etc. But where are we? What are we? Are we like the Matrix pods living the dream? You know, and so is that a concern? If, you know, in the movie The Matrix, in the first movie The Matrix, and I forget the name of one of the protagonists, it's not Neo, it's the guy that sells out the Morpheus to...
Oh, I think it was Cypher. Was
yeah. Good man, well done. So Cypher, he's sitting in a steak restaurant, and he's talking to Agent, what's his name? I forget now.
Agent Smith. I just saw this. I just saw the sequel. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I did as well. So Agent Smith is saying, "Well, what do you want?" And he says, "You know, I want to be able to eat. I know this steak. You know, there's nothing. There's no qualia, but the system is providing it, and he wants to go back into the Matrix and be somebody important, like an actor, a president, you know, Ronald Reagan. But he says the phrase, ignorance is bliss. And that comes from Plato, from the allegory of the cave. And basically, if you're living in the cave and all that you see is the shadows that are being presented to you, then you can have what you think is a happy life because you're ignorant about the fact that you're in chains and being given a phantasm of a performance of shadows. And that's the life that you think you have. And you can't transcend that. And of course, the hero of the allegory goes out of the cave and sees the goodness of the sun and of nature and sees that it's well beyond the simple reality being shown in Plato's cave. So, yeah, it's a nice little piece about the Wachowski brothers, or now we say sisters, I think. And the point is that ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is a way of satisfying an empty stomach. And what we need is just that little bit of hunger to really work out what is going on in the world. And if the AI superintelligence is providing a metaverse for us, is providing entertainment, and it's Plato's cave. And we are being satisfied, but one day we may wake up and want to see the real world. Am I making any kind of sense to you, Tim?
Absolutely. Martin, on that note, let me close for today. Let me thank you again so much for your time. This is absolutely brilliant thoughts on AI superintelligence and the singularity.
Nice of you to say so.